Hello, I'm Glen Scrivener. We're in Luke chapter 5. So if you have a Bible, why don't you grab it and have a look at chapter 5 and verse 30. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to Christ's disciples. They said, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Have you ever heard the saying, "You can tell a man by the company he keeps"? The Pharisees clearly had heard of this saying because they were looking at the company that Jesus was keeping, sinners and tax collectors, and they concluded that Jesus must be one of them. You can tell a man by the company he keeps. So what do we make of this Jesus? That's an absolutely vital question to answer. What do we make of this Jesus? In verses 31 and 32, Jesus tells us what we should make of him. He answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." We're going to have a look at three different characteristics of Jesus, three different portraits of Christ in Luke chapters 4 and 5. First, we're going to see Jesus is the commander-in-chief. We're going to see Jesus is the master of the banquet. And we're going to see that Jesus is the spiritual doctor. But first of all, let's think of Jesus, who is the commander-in-chief. Jesus begins his public ministry back in Luke chapter 4. In verses 18 and 19, Jesus reads out from Isaiah chapter 61. Here is his mission statement. Can you imagine sort of Lord Kitchener with his finger coming out saying, "I want you"? Or perhaps those posters of Uncle Sam with his finger pointing out of the portrait saying, "I want you," those recruitment posters. Well, here is Jesus giving his recruitment policy for the kingdom. Luke chapter 4 verse 18, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Do we see who Jesus is for in these verses? He is for the poor, he is for the prisoners, he is for the blind, he is for the oppressed. What kind of commander-in-chief is this Jesus? He's like nothing that the world has ever seen. And as he recruits for his kingdom, he starts to pick all the sorts of people that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law would never touch with a barge pole. Chapter 5 and verse 1, Jesus, to recruit his first disciples, where does he go? Does he go to the Bible college? Does he go to the university? No, he goes to the fishing village. He goes to the pier. He goes to the wharf. He goes to the fishing boat. And he calls Simon and his two friends. This is the beginning of the kingdom. Here is Jesus and three unemployed fishermen. Something's building. What's going to happen next? Well, Jesus moves on, and in verse 12, he comes across a leper, somebody who was a spiritual and social outcast, somebody suffering with this terrible disease. And Jesus reaches out to the man and he says, "I'm willing, you be clean." He claims somebody else for his kingdom. Here is a man, a leper, who the rest of the community would run from. Jesus runs towards. They would have worried that the leper would have infected Jesus. Instead, Jesus gives the leper a good infection. And he claims the leper for his kingdom. So here we have Jesus, three unemployed fishermen, and an ex-leper. Something's building. What's going to happen next? Well, from verse 17, we see that Jesus is teaching and the paralytic comes. Jesus heals the man, forgives his sins, and here we have another member of the kingdom, a former paralytic. And it's just an astonishing assortment of people who the world has just walked past. This paralyzed man, he would have begged for change while the world walks on. But not Jesus. Jesus doesn't walk on. He says, I'll have the fisherman, I'll have the leper, I'll have the paralyzed man. And then, verse 27, oh dear, verse 27. You might think he's going too far. Everybody there thought Jesus is going far too far. Yes, it seems like a good idea. Let's get the fisherman. I like what you're doing with the fisherman, Jesus. That sounds great. The leper, it's a lovely touch. That's really sweet. Let's go with the leper. The paralyzed man. Oh, well done, Jesus. We like this kind of ragtag group of rough around the edges disciples. That's nice. But verse 27, After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi. And at that stage, everybody's thinking, you've gone too far. You've gone far too far, Jesus. Here is the most hated man in the province. Here is a man who was a collaborator with the Romans. Here is a man who is stealing far too much money from his own people and then giving it to the hated enemy. This man, Levi. There would be many people who'd come up to Levi saying, I've got 2 words for you, buddy. But I wonder how many people would have had Jesus' 2 words. In verse 27, Jesus says, follow me. I wonder what Levi was thinking at that stage. At this stage, Levi is confronted with the commander-in-chief who's saying, follow me. And he has a choice to make. Either there is the life that he already knows, a life that is financially secure, a life where he calls the shots. On the other hand, Jesus is calling him to something else. A life in which he has no financial security, a life in which he does not call the shots anymore. And what guarantees does Jesus give to Levi? When he says, follow me, what guarantees does Levi have? Absolutely none. Absolutely none. The one thing Levi will get if he follows Jesus is Jesus. And friends, if you follow Jesus, the one thing you're promised in this life, the one thing you're promised if you follow Jesus is Jesus. You might not be able to keep your job if you follow Jesus. Levi did not keep his job when he followed Jesus. You might have security ripped from you. You might have your health ripped from you. You might have all kinds of finances and family ripped from you if you follow Jesus. But the one thing you will get if you follow Jesus is Jesus. But if you've got your head screwed on right, if you're seeing things rightly, the one thing you will want is Jesus. That's who Levi wanted. Verse 28, he got up, he left everything, and he followed him. So that's the first picture of Jesus. Jesus is the commander-in-chief who comes into this world and says to the whole world, whether they've qualified in the courts of human approval or not, he says to the whole world, follow me. I want you. Levi says yes. But in saying yes to the commander-in-chief, Levi also realizes that Jesus is the master of the banquet. That's the second portrait we see of Jesus here. Look from verse 29. Verse 29, then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him. Isn't this a wonderful picture of Jesus? Jesus, the party animal, you might say. Jesus, the one who loved to eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners. You might know the line from Luke chapter 7 that Jesus is the friend of sinners. People loved to be around Jesus. And as you look through Luke's gospel, if you want to find Jesus, the place you're going to find him is at a dinner party. On every page of Luke's gospel, Jesus is either at a dinner party, or he's telling people how to throw better dinner parties, or he's describing heaven as a dinner party. Why does he do that? Well, according to the Bible, we are heading towards a tremendous feast in which Jesus will host, and we will toast on that day the death of death, the death of suffering, the cleansing of creation, all tears wiped away. You're all invited to that feast. Jesus comes into this world to invite us to this feast, and we see people here flocking towards Jesus. Do you see Jesus as someone you would want to flock towards? Do you see him as the master of the banquet? Somebody who really got the master of the banquet was Quentin Hogg, or Lord Hailsham, the former Lord Chancellor. He became a Christian when he realized this side of Jesus. He said, the first thing we should learn about Jesus is that we should have been absolutely entranced by his company. Jesus was irresistibly attractive as a man. What they crucified was a young man, vital, full of life and the joy of it, the Lord of life itself, and even more, the Lord of laughter. Someone so utterly attractive that people followed him for the sheer fun of it. I love that. Followed him for the sheer fun of it. Why did Levi leave everything to follow Jesus? One answer is for the sheer fun of it, just to be with Jesus. Listen, if Jesus came into your room right now and said, follow me, would you do it? Would you follow him? I mean, obviously we'd want to ask him questions. Where are we going? Do I need to bring anything? Jesus will just say, don't worry about that. Just follow me. Would you? Would you want to follow Jesus? If you know Jesus, the master of the banquet, you will follow him in a flash. Lord Hailsham goes on. He says, we need to recapture the vision of this glorious and happy man whose mere presence filled his companions with delight. He would have the children laughing all round him and squealing with pleasure and joy as he picked them up. Do you see Jesus like this? The master of the banquet. The wonder of Jesus, the master of the banquet, is that he is dying to invite you to this final feast. The night before he died, Jesus held another dinner party, the Last Supper. He tore apart bread in his hand, saying, this is my body, torn apart for you. Poured out red wine, saying, this is my blood, poured out for you. Because he would be torn apart and poured out to invite you to this feast. It costs you nothing. On the cross, it cost Jesus everything. You're all invited. There's only one kind of person that is not welcome at this feast. Only one. It's the righteous. The righteous. Isn't that a shock? Verse 30, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus answered them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now, I'm an Australian male, which means that I very rarely go to the doctor. Don't worry, I complain about every cough and cold like it's bubonic plague, but I very rarely actually make my way to the doctor. And when I do, I like to save up all my illnesses so that I've got a good list of at least 17. Why do I do this? Because you don't want to go into the doctors and they think that you've got no problems. Nobody goes into the doctors and says, I'm a picture of perfect health. Are you impressed? The doctor will not be impressed. You're wasting their time. Doctors are for sick people, and Jesus is for sinners. Only for sinners. Are you a sinner? Or do you claim to be righteous like these Pharisees? Obviously, these Pharisees aren't actually righteous. We'll see as we read on through Luke's gospel. Actually, these are the people who end up handing over Jesus to death. They're not actually righteous, but they pretend. They cover over their sickness, and they refuse the doctor's care. Do you see Jesus as a doctor for the sick? I meet so many people who say to me, Glenn, I feel like I'm too bad for Jesus. Obviously, you can't be too bad for Jesus. That's like saying, I'm too sick for the doctor. You can't be too sick for the doctor. You can't be too bad for Jesus. Jesus has come for sinners. Only for sinners. Do you recognize that in yourself? What's your picture of Jesus? He is the commander-in-chief. And he says to the world, no matter what they've done, no matter what their station in life, he says, follow me. Will you follow? Jesus is the master of the banquet, inviting the world into the most glorious feast. All for free, all at the cost of his own life. And Jesus is the spiritual doctor. Will you come to Jesus, not bringing him all your spiritual CV, your spiritual resume, all the things that you've done? Will you come not bringing your health? Will you come bringing your sickness? That way, you will qualify for the doctor's care. What's your picture of Christ? He's the commander, he's the host, he's the doctor.